right. Hi, hello. Welcome to the Rare Plants and Natural Communities of Marshall County, Kentucky. My name is Kendall McDonald, and I am a botanist and lichenologist with the Office of Kentucky Nature Preserves. Office of Kentucky Nature Preserves has a lot of statutory duties. We conserve natural areas through the Kentucky Heritage Land Conservation Fund, Wild River System, and the State Nature Preserve System. We house the OKNP Natural Heritage Database and the Kentucky Biological Assessment Tool, or the KY-BAT. OKNP Natural Areas Branch works to conserve our natural areas through land management techniques such as invasive pest treatments, prescribed fire, invasive plant herbicide treatment, mechanical removal, and more. We also employ a team of botanists, entomologists, lichenologists, aquatic biologists, and ecologists to discover, monitor, and maintain the rare species populations of Kentucky. We work to reach the public through passive recreation on our state nature preserves and through environmental education. But enough about what we do. Let's get into what we came to talk about today, the rare plants of Marshall County. So one thing that really influences the kinds of plants in an area is the physiographic features of that area. So we're going to go through a couple of those in Marshall County, just to give a little background. There are 3 major physiographic provinces in Kentucky, and Marshall County falls within the coastal plain. I've roughly marked Marshall County with this red star here. Within those physiographic provinces, we break them down even more into natural regions. So you can see here we have several natural regions. Marshall County would be down in western Kentucky, of course, and it has 2 natural regions within Marshall County. For all of these zoomed in maps, there will be a red rough borderline drawn around generally where Marshall County is, just for your reference, but that is certainly not completely accurate or to scale, so just keep that in mind. So the coastal plain where Marshall County is has 2 separate natural areas. We have the Mississippi Lower Ohio River floodplain in this brighter yellow color, and then we have the coastal plain in the darker yellow. Most rocks across Kentucky are sedimentary, such as limestones, sandstones, and shales. Marshall County overlays rocks formed during the Cretaceous to the late Neogene periods, making this one of the youngest parts of our state. Most of the sediments in Marshall County are gravels, shales, clays, or sands that were deposited in ancient coastal or floodplain environments. And therefore, these soils have a lot of naturally high fertility. Kentucky's elevation generally increases going from west to east. The lowest elevation is along the Mississippi River in the extreme southwest corner of Fulton County, and the highest elevation is on top of Black Mountain in the Harlan County in extreme southeast Kentucky. Marshall County is one of the lowest average elevation counties in the state, ranging from about 300 to 550 feet above sea level. Those relatively low elevations and the ones that surround Kentucky and Kentucky's proximity to the Gulf of Mexico add a tropical marine influence that moderates temperatures and increases precipitation. And therefore, the growing season in Kentucky lengthens and the annual mean temperature increases as you go from northeast to the southwest. And annual precipitation in Kentucky also increases as you go north to south. So therefore, in comparison to the rest of the state, Marshall County is generally hotter, wetter, and has a longer growing season. So what does that mean? What do all these physical things mean? You know, we have our geology, our topography and elevation, and our Gulf influences. So what that means is that Marshall County has really naturally fertile soils due to its underlying geology. Due to its topography and elevation, it is a rolling to flat topography. And due to where it is, it also has these Gulf influences, bringing in longer growing seasons, warmer temperatures, more rain, and milder winters. So what does that do? Well, before Europeans came to America, settled Kentucky, Kentucky was very different. It was, completely covered in prairie, forest, woodland, and wetland. You could walk from one end of the state to the other and never leave the forest. And there are parts of the state where you could walk in tall grass prairies so tall that they were as tall as a person on horseback. And then towards the western part of the state, there were vast, huge bottomland wetlands and cypress swamps. Marshall County itself was largely forest and wetland, with a small portion in the south being open woodland and prairie. Archaeological evidence tells us the first people arrived in what is now Kentucky about 12,000 years ago. In the Mississippian and late prehistoric periods, agriculture significantly improved, and therefore people could yield more food and have a more stable lifestyle in one place and have all of their needs met. So a place like Marshall County was very good for agriculture, just due to its physical characteristics, and therefore people were able to settle there, farm there, and raise livestock there. So Marshall County, compared to other counties, was probably used more for cropland and pasture. Kentucky's current land cover, this is the land cover of Kentucky, is an expression of its land use. Counties with level to rolling areas, such as Marshall County, are now predominantly pasture, cropland, or developed and urban areas. These highly altered areas, unfortunately, offer little natural habitat and support few native species. Few forests and wetlands remain, and most of them only occur on protected lands. Most of Marshall County is unfortunately private land, with most of its public lands belonging to Land Between the Lakes and places like Clarks River WMA. In this photo, the protected lands are highlighted in lime green. Due to this small acreage of protected lands and therefore native intact habitat, rare plants have a reduced presence in modern-day Marshall County. So unfortunately, as we go through here, I don't have too many species to show you, and it's not because Marshall County is not a special county, it is just a reflection of the land use since the settlement of humans. All right, so now we're going to start talking about some of the rare plants and rare habitats that you can find in Marshall County. I'm breaking these up by habitat, so that way when you're out in a natural area, you can see what kind of habitat you are in and then find the appropriate plants for that habitat. The first one we're going to go over is prairies and open woodlands. So when I say prairies, I'm thinking of a native tall grass, for lack of a better word, field, but it's not a field, it's a prairie. And an open woodland is kind of similar to a prairie, just very wide spaced between the trees and lots of open space for sunlight to come through to the vegetation floor. The first plant we're going to talk about is purple milkweed. Purple milkweed is a perennial native to eastern North America, and its preferred habitat is woodlands and prairies. Today, you can find this species a lot along roadsides and power line corridors, since those are maintained and kept open. The milkweed takes advantage of that habitat. It blooms from June to August, and you cannot miss these brilliant pink-purple flowers as you are driving by the road. Like all milkweeds, this plant produces a bitter-tasting and potentially irritating white latex. in its leaves and stems. So if you break a leaf or a stem, a white milky latex will come out of them. All milkweeds are important to conservation of the monarch butterfly. They act as a host for the caterpillars. The caterpillars come up and they're hungry and they munch on the milkweed leaves. The next wildflower we'll talk about is cream wild indigo. This is a member of the pea family, and it likes to grow in open, sunny areas such as prairies and savannas. The cream-colored flowers bloom in early spring, and they droop over and hang to the ground, which is something that separates this species from others in the same genus. This herbaceous perennial plant is a sprawling plant that looks like a small bush. It has leaves that are palmately compound and trifoliate, meaning that they are divided into 3 sections and arranged alternately on the stem. And just like the milkweed, this plant also takes advantage of roadsides and power line corridors in the modern day. Next, we have hairy hawkweed. This is a member of the aster family, sometimes called the sunflower family, and it is native to central North America. It is a very tall herb. It can grow up to 6.5 feet tall with a very long, skinny stem that grows up from a basal rosette of leaves. This is a very, very hairy plant, as you can probably tell, given its common name. It has leaves, stems, and bracts covered in hairs that are up to 1/2 inch long. So they're very conspicuous, very noticeable. Not many plants have 1/2 inch long hairs. Each of those long, skinny stems produces up to 12 flowering heads, and each of those flowering heads, or what a layperson might just consider the entire flower, is actually a composite of up to 60 flowers within one flowering head. This particular species has ray flowers, and you can see that within the picture in the top center. All right, our next one is our Threadleaf Sundrops. This is a member of the evening primrose family, and it is native to the Southeast United States. This is a small annual that flowers from May until July. The leaves along the stem are really thin and thread-like. They are less than 1/25 of an inch wide, so very, very tiny. These flowers have a really interesting blooming habit. The flowers actually don't open until around sunset. They stay open throughout the night and through the next morning, and then they close back up during the heat of the day. Our next one is Buckleys Goldenrod. This is a species of goldenrod native to central North America. It is an uncommon species with a small range. It prefers a habitat like open oak woodlands. It can get about 4 feet tall, so this is a significantly tall goldenrod. One interesting thing about this plant is it has basal leaves until it flowers, and those basal leaves at the bottom actually wilt away by the time the plant is flowering. Next one we'll talk about is Trifolium Reflexum, buffalo clover. This is a species of clover native to the eastern United States. It is found in natural openings that include woodlands, glades, prairies, and often in acidic areas. It is an annual or biennial that produces white to dark pink flowers in the late spring. Early in European colonization of the Americas, clover species like this were recorded as forming a major component of the plant life in the meadows and open woodlands. But unfortunately, like many native clovers in the eastern United States, these populations have declined considerably over the last 200 years. And for this species in particular, it is thought that fire suppression is a significant cause for this decline. Now we're going to talk about wetlands. So wetlands are kind of an umbrella term for many different kinds of habitats. If it is often wet or moist, it can be considered a wetland habitat. In our consideration here, we're talking about wet meadows, and I mean that is almost always wet. We're talking swamps, we're talking lakes, rivers, streams, the edges of those things, cypress swamps, shrub swamps, anything in between can be a wetland. The first one we're going to talk about is actually a sedge, the Cypress knee sedge. This is primarily a southern species. Unfortunately, its wetland habitats have declined significantly due to extensive wetland drainage, and this species unfortunately cannot handle lots of hydrologic change. It needs undisturbed organic rich backwaters, and it often grows on the stumps of cypress and trunks and on soil hummocks. It is thought that Cypress knee sedge may have a required association with cypress, buttonbush, or swamp tupelo bases, trunks, or logs for successful germination or growth. That's not 100% proven, but it is one of the theories because this sedge is often found growing at the bases of trees. Okay, water hickory. This is also known as the bitter pecan. It is a very large tree that can grow up to over 100 feet tall. It is the dominant plant species found in clay flats and backwater areas near streams and rivers in the southeast. Water hickory is a major component of wetland forests in the southeastern U.S., mostly because of selective logging efforts that happened in the past, and water hickory was not a desirable tree for logging purposes, so therefore it was left, and now it is one of the only major big trees left in a lot of areas. The water hickory is considered really important in cleansing drainage waters because this plant slows the water down during flooding, which allows sediments to fall out into the water column instead of remaining in there and spreading. This next one is one of my favorites, the rose turtle head. This is an herbaceous perennial plant that can grow up to 3 feet tall and is usually unbranched. It has opposite leaves that tend to droop down. The flowers are located on a central stem on a short spike. Each flower is about 1 inch to 1/2 inch in length and varies from purple to pink in coloration. The blooming period often occurs between late summer and early fall, so it's one of our later bloomers in this presentation. The root system is rhizomatous, and therefore you can often see this plant in vegetative colonies. So when you see it, you'll see clumps of it or like small populations all together instead of the plant being scattered throughout the habitat. It really likes places such as alluvial or floodplain forests, swamps, marshes, seepage springs, and on the banks of creeks, streams, rivers, and small lakes. All right, next we have a tree, the common silverbell. This is a small deciduous tree that grows about 60 feet tall. It is found in scattered population over much of the eastern United States, but it is thinly distributed over much of its native range and is becoming rare in many areas. It really likes rich hardwood forests and stream banks. It has these beautiful, delicate white to pinkish bell-shaped flowers that droop gracefully along the undersides of the branches in March, April, and May. An interesting thing about this tree that makes it different from the other plants we've seen today is that this is often cultivated as an ornamental tree in landscaping. Oh, I love this guy, the little blue mud plantain. This is one of my first wetland plants that I ever saw. And so therefore it has a special place in my heart. This is a flowering annual plant in the water hyacinth family. It likes to grow in shallow water or on mud. It has very variable colored flowers. They can be blue, purple, or white, but they were always perfect, and they have 6 parts with narrow petals and 3 stamens. The flowering period for this flower is extremely brief and is kind of due up to the environmental conditions, but the flowering can occur anytime from May to November. The flowers open early in the morning and they are completely withered by noon. Okay, you guys are probably familiar with this genus, the irises. These are often used in landscaping. This is one of our native irises, the Zig Zag Iris. This is a rhizomatous perennial that is native to North America. It has bright green, glossy leaves that actually zigzag along the stem and I believe 45-degree angles. The flower comes in different shades of blue, blue-violet, lavender, light blue, pale blue, very variable flower. It blooms from early to midsummer, so about April to mid-July, and it grows in moist fields, damp prairies, wet meadows, moist woodlands, streams, riverbanks, marsh areas, and then also around lakes, ponds, ravines at the base of slopes. So this one will mostly be found in the wetter areas in your area. Okay, our next one, chaff weed, our tiny, tiny flower. This little guy is a member of the primrose family, and it is actually native to much of North America. The flowers are very, very tiny, as you can see in the center picture. They are usually less than 1/8 of an inch across when they are fully spreading. So very tiny flowers. The leaves are also tiny. They're usually less than 1/4 of an inch long and 1/8 of an inch wide. And this plant's habitat is typically described as sandy or muddy soil, so that is prone to temporary standing water, such as pond edges or the low ground in old fields. And now we have our last plant for the area, which is American ginseng. So American ginseng, I'm sure a lot of you have heard of this. It's a herbaceous perennial plant in the ginseng family that is commonly used as traditional herb medicine in China. It is native to Eastern North America, but it is also cultivated in China. It is not listed as an endangered species, but it has been declared under threat by some states. In the state of Kentucky, we declare it a special concern plant due to its commercially exploited status. It is normally found in deciduous forest in the Appalachian and Ozark regions of the United States. It likes full shade environments in deciduous forest underneath hardwoods, and the more undisturbed and older the forest, the happier the ginseng populations will be. So unfortunately, that is all the time I have today. I thank you guys so much for listening about the rare plants of Marshall County. Just in case you want to look further into anything I talked about, here are some of my sources where I got my maps and photos and information on the species today. So again, my name is Kendall McDonald. I'm a botanist and lichenologist with the Office of Kentucky Nature Preserves, and thank you so much for listening to my talk today.